Today, as you can see, we have David Hines, and he's going to be talking about building a lean culture from the bottom up. So I'll let David introduce himself, but let me say that he has a vast experience in this field and as a consultant with other companies. So I think this is going to be pretty interesting stuff. Thank you, David, for taking the time to be here today.
My name is David Hines. I've been involved in lean process improvement going back to the 90s. I actually was the owner and general manager of a business where we developed and applied lean techniques. So this is about building lean culture from the bottom up. One is this idea of a frontline operating system. And then a lean development, the idea of lean development as a way of implementing this frontline operating system. They're trying to transform organizations. And the way they do it is they train process improvement techniques. So it could be lean techniques, could be Six Sigma techniques, various ways, kind of more technical in a sense, of ways of improving work. They facilitate lean projects. It could be Kaizen events. It could be sometimes Six Sigma projects and so forth. All along the way, they're really trying to encourage the development of this idea of a lean culture. More difficult areas because culture is very hard to change, and especially coming in as a quality professional, whether you're a consultant or you're part of the organization, you really don't have any direct control over the kind of culture the organization has. There really seems to be three general types of lean culture. I mean, generally, lean culture is viewed as a combination of continuous improvement, constantly getting better, and respect for people. Those are considered to be the two pillars of a lean culture. Really three, in my opinion, three different kinds of lean cultures. One is basically continuous improvement is the main focus. You don't disrespect people, but you don't really focus on some of the engagement aspects of lean, of Gemba walks and stand-up meetings and things like that. And sometimes this continuous improvement can be very technical, statistical. That's where a lot of that we talk about Lean Six Sigma. So those would be kind of a type 1 lean culture. Type 2 is where it's more of a balance. It's not just about technical improvement and that sort of thing. It also brings in how do you get people involved? How do you respect people? And then the third type, which really kind of goes beyond even type 2, is where this lean culture of continuous improvement and respect for people is like the foundation for the organizational culture. They kind of merge together. They become very closely aligned. And these are often referred to as business operating systems. And the key thing is you'll see very full engagement. It's not just, a few experts running the lean projects. You're seeing broad engagement of most everybody in the organization. And some of the examples, of course, you have the original that were started all of this and inspired it, is this whole Toyota production system, but specialized towards Toyota and really manufacturing oriented. But then you have, for example, the Danaher business system, which grew out of the Toyota system, viewed as a way of that's how Danaher, his whole culture is kind of revolving around these ideas of lean techniques and experience with is City Furniture, one of the leading furniture retailers in the Southeast now. They've really grown beyond, they're getting outside of Florida and really growing. And I've kind of lived with them for the last 12 years of watching them in their lean journey. And they're one of the few non-manufacturing organizations that really have adopted an operating system where lean becomes their organizational culture. So this is kind of what I call the type 3 cultures. These are pretty rare, really get the culture going. As anybody that has done this for some time knows, culture is perhaps the most important aspect of making lean work, getting the culture right. We talk about our lean journey, right? And this is my vision of the lean journey is we're not quite sure where it goes. It's a wandering road. And having lived through City Furniture's journey, I can see the twists and turns. And at the beginning, you don't really have a roadmap. A couple of things I've observed. One is that there is no clear path to get to be one of these operating systems. But number two is to build these cultures, even though you need that top down, the work happens from the bottom up. when you're trying to get people engaged, you're talking about one by one at the front line. So over time, I've kind of evolved an approach to teaching and consulting lean that involves what I call the frontline operating system. So this is kind of a roadmap, an initial view of a company coming in who says, gee, I'm interested in lean. I might want to do some of this. Or you may already be interested in lean, but don't feel the culture has really taken on, that you're more in kind of that type 1 area. So what you're seeing here, this operating system, one of the key distinctions of it is it's training for frontline managers. It's not meant to be a process improvement program. It's really a management training. And so it's organized around 4 key functions of management. Every manager has to do this. Every manager has to lead their team, their department. All these managers are running the teams that do work. Everybody has to do work. Everybody has to organize their workplace, and everybody has to solve problems. So these are things that these frontline managers are doing already. We're just trying to bring in the lean way of doing them. And the lean way involves certain specific techniques, Gemba walk, standard work, trying to show frontline managers the lean way of doing these common activities they're already doing, how to deploy lean techniques and tools, how to think differently, because each one of these has a little different way of thinking. Thinking of work as a process, understanding problems as forms of waste. And of course, one of the keys is leading the importance of trust. And then over here, as you're organizing, what is a workspace? What does that really mean? Because sometimes those workspaces are physical and sometimes they're virtual. And that's another important aspect of this. The approach to a project like this is to bring in this, implement this kind of a system, is to say, what are the lean ways of doing these 4 things? We know we're doing it some way now as a manager. And this just kind of concisely says what it is. What's the lean way of leading? You build trust, mutual trust, by respectfully engaging with employees at their place of work. What's the lean way of doing work? How do we do work in a lean way? You create, follow, and improve standard work. Fundamental is, those who are familiar with lean, you know how important that is. For the core processes, not necessarily every activity. The lean way of solving problems, improve the flow of work by eliminating waste. Fundamental idea. And then the lean way of organizing is to build your workplace around visual controls, making everything open and transparent. A lean development project is the way in which frontline groups can learn and implement that type of system. And this is the example of project that I will be talking about today. So the purpose of a lean development project, basically to teach and field test those fundamental tools and techniques that you saw in that chart that make up what I call a minimum viable frontline operating system. So as I said, those business operating systems you saw before, the Danahers and the City Furnitures, take years to develop. So it's not like we're trying to do this, in a short period of time, but you can get the basic operating system running, and actually in about a 3 to 6 month period. And that's what I want to give you more detail today, and then we can talk about it and get your questions. Typical frontline groups, so the groups and the managers that we're teaching could be small business units like teams, they could be departments, could be restaurants in a large chain, or it could be small businesses they're just running a restaurant. And so any of those are kind of frontline groups that this would apply to. What we expect to get out of the project, improving some performance. I mean, it's meant to have some immediate improvement to that frontline group. But it also makes positive changes to the local frontline working environment, not necessarily the whole culture of the organization, just that group. And that's doable. You don't have to change. You can do it within a group as long as there's a reasonable amount of autonomy. We're also expecting that we're providing a foundation for building this kind of resilient lean culture through the whole organization. So that's kind of the culture from the bottom up idea, that you're, one by one, getting this frontline operating system in place in some of the groups. And then over time, it can, as people see the successes of it and how it works, it can spread. And so that's actually what I'll show you what we're doing here in South Florida. Some of the features of the project. It's kind of a combination of process improvement, but also organizational development, which is the world of management training. And, a lot of times if you're trying to change your culture, you look to an organizational development consultant. So, which is more of sort of the soft skills, people skills aspect, as opposed to process improvement tends to be more, technical workflow engineering kinds of improvements. So it's really a combination. In organizational development, you're trying to change culture, right? You're trying to build culture. So what often happens is you try to change the way people think, the way their attitudes about certain things, and hoping that by doing that, you change their behavior, which changes the culture. But here, it's sort of the opposite. You're actually trying to change the way they think by changing the way they act. It's been said that you're acting your way to a new way of thinking rather than trying to think your way to a new way of acting. So, and it's an important point because it's just, you start doing things in a little bit different way, and then over time, you can start changing the way you think about things and the way you view things. So that's sort of the overall approach. Typically, one of these projects can apply to just one business unit, maybe more than one. The one we're going to talk about today has 2 business units involved. This can be done, is very doable in a 3 to 6 month period. Normally is facilitated. You need an experienced trainer, but it's not heavy duty. I've tried to make this a do-it-yourself thing. There are certain aspects that are just difficult to do if you don't have some experience in doing these. But so it does require some facilitation either from the outside or, somebody who's been through this could become an internal facilitator as well. We'll talk about that. This is an important aspect here too, a transitional approach. So, a lot of times in lean projects, we talk about transformation. And while we know that's something, that's important and needed, as a business manager or owner, if somebody comes to me and says, well, I'm going to transform, forget everything we're going to do it a whole new way. I'm like, whoa, hold on. So really, everything I'm doing now is wrong. So the project we're doing right now is a flexible schedule. What we're trying to do is get the most buy-in. We're trying to get people to really believe in this, because one of the main reasons why these, projects don't last is because, you don't have the buy-in. And that's a killer for any kind of an improvement project. Understanding what is lean thinking and when you apply it in this way as an frontline operating system, basically you have a less stressful and more desirable workplace. Now, of course, we know we get the performance gains and all that, but this is really, you're trying to explain it to some of the management, but also all employees. And all of these are true. All of these I've seen over and over again. Building respectful and trusting relationships, reducing fear, often associated with change. That's a big deal. All employees can share in the pride of making improvements and so forth. Eliminating annoying pebbles in your shoe. I mean, there's just so many different ways to look at this and see the benefits of it. And specifically for managers, because they're key here. You've got to get the buy-in of those frontline managers. If you don't, this is not going to work. And here's from a manager's perspective. Your team, you're going to get high level of performance with relatively low levels of stress. You don't have to come up with all the ideas and all the answers. The burden's not all on you. You're getting all employees involved in not only understanding and maintaining quality, but coming up with suggestions for improvements. One of the characteristics of those business operating systems is that they measure number of suggestions per employee. And I know City Furniture, I think they're over 3 improvement suggestions per employee per year. Some of the Toyota plants, I understand, are in the 80 to 90 suggestions per employee per year. So it can really take a lot of the burden off of the manager to have all the ideas. You'll have an agile team, again, less fearful, more trusting. People are more willing to accept change, and that leads to greater agility, which is so important in today's world. And then some of the less stress is, less concern about what employees might be doing behind your back. I mean, that's a reality of, how closely you got to watch everybody. You can't walk away. I mean, you always have to watch because people are people, but there's less concern about it. So the project has 4 modules, and each module relates to one of those ways of managing, right? Leading, here's your leading, working, solving problems, and organizing. This is kind of my preferred sequence, and that's the one I'll show you what we're doing in the project that I'll talk about today. But basically, there's 8 tools and techniques. The top row, these are what I consider to be kind of management tools. So these are things that the managers would, whether they do a trust assessment, and that's a special case. That's not really a standard lean. Most of these are kind of, and I found that trust, this measure of trust that you can actually measure with this tool, is a key way to not only assess on the front end how much work you have to do on the culture, but how are you doing as you go along. You can periodically do kind of a trust check to see where your organization stands. These are kind of the management tools. Management would put in place a standard work system. They have process improvement methods. They put in place visual controls. The bottom row, these are what I consider to be kind of engagement techniques. So these are the ways in which the managers engage with their team. Gemba walking, stand-up meetings, and then lastly, 5S organizing. Here's the ongoing project that we're about 6 weeks into in an agency called Task Force for Ending Homelessness. And no, this is not a typo. That's part of what's called the COC network in Broward County, Florida. That's kind of the Fort Lauderdale area. COC is Continuum of Care. That's a network of agencies that HUD, Housing and Urban Development, set up funding for to address homelessness. And there's about 300 of these networks around the country. Performance metrics, there's sharing of information. It's really an interesting situation. The Task Force for Ending Homelessness, that's the organization. It's an independent nonprofit, about 30 people. And their role in serving the homeless is outreach primarily, as well as what they call housing navigation. Their job is to reach out to homeless individuals, make contact, get them into their system. This is very work on getting them off the street, whether initially in temporary housing and then ultimately in permanent housing, as well as providing other services they may need along the way, such as substance abuse, dealing with mental health issues, and so forth. So this is the project that I'm doing right now. I'm facilitating. I'm showing you here is how it's being presented. This is how it was presented. The goal is to apply lean thinking. So we expect you're going to be able to deliver more focused and effective services for clients. So we try to make that specific, more focused and more effective services for the homeless clients. Eliminating waste, okay, making better use of the budgets, the limited budgets. Improve coordination with other continuum of care organizations. As I said, these are networks. So in Broward County, the Fort Lauderdale area, there's about 20 organizations. Some involve helping people to get jobs and prepare resumes. Others are focused on helping with mental illness, other substance abuse, and so forth. So getting all that coordinated, it's a job. And we see that applying this kind of lean development and putting in place this frontline operating system will be a way of not only improving this one agency with about 30 people in it, but also how they coordinate with others. Another agency will join and another agency, and eventually we'll get the whole continuum of care kind of operating under this umbrella. So again, we present the project as learning and introducing these 4 essential elements: the lean way of leading, working, solving problems, and organizing. We're trying to introduce lean thinking. Well, what is lean thinking? Well, it's really, in a sense, the same as lean culture. It's continuous improvement, respect for people. What's continuous improvement? It's a way of thinking about work. You view work as a set of processes, and so they learn the idea of processes, how to break down a process. But work is a set of processes and which are performed in workspaces that also get organized, and those are standardized and continuously improved. So that's, in a nutshell, what we're trying to get across as the idea of continuous improvement thinking. And respect for people, just say, think of your employees as partners that you want to fully engage in doing that, in doing the continuous improvement. So again, a simple way of thinking about it, but it's very powerful because it really is the core of making this work. Some of the front end decisions, we had to have the project sponsor. That was the CEO of agency. Project team members, probably the key person is the project leader. We've been so fortunate that Jacob Torner really bought into this early on and has been this project. I'm really proud of it, of the team and what they're doing, because it wasn't mandated by the CEO. It was really mid and lower level individuals who saw the benefit of this and have really taken it on. So the initiative is coming from the middle and the bottom. This is part of that bottom up idea. So it's really gratifying to see that. So you have the leader, and then you have the frontline managers. There's 2 frontline managers, which I'll show you. And then the other person there is, because it's called the HMIS system, their information system. It covers all the network of COC agencies, not just task force. Their key IT administrator is also there, because obviously IT is a big part of these processes. You also on the front end have to decide who are the target groups. So the 2 frontline managers, their 2 groups, those are the ones we're going to be training. But the testing part is you have to pick a particular process and a particular workspace. So that's the idea is in each session, each of those 4 modules, they learn in a classroom setting for a couple hours the key concepts and techniques, and then they go out in the field and actually try to apply them in particular processes and workspaces. And the way you do, and then of course an initial project schedule. In this case, we let it be flexible because we wanted to be able to adjust to, we don't want to just finish this to finish it. We want to be able to adjust to correspond to, the operating demands. We're recognizing this is something going on, an ongoing operation. So outreach services, which their job is basically going out where the homeless are unsheltered and making initial contact, getting them in the system, helping refer them to other services. And their specific target process was what happens when a homeless person is in a hospital and is being discharged. And oftentimes then services to that individual shift from the hospital to the task force outreach folks. So anytime you have that kind of double agency situation, there's a lot that could be improved. So we're looking at that part of the process. And then the workspace would be partly in the hospital, where you have hospital social workers trying to discharge the homeless individuals, and then the offices of the task force people. The other group is the housing navigation group. Now, this part of the task force, these are the people that once somebody's in the system and maybe is in a temporary shelter in some situation, they're trying to help the homeless individual get permanent supportive housing. This takes longer. This typically is 140 days type, plus or minus, for various reasons, which is what kind of got me interested. I said, that sounds like a lean challenge. And so we're working on that. But here, their target process involves RSC program enrollment, which is a special program for people with serious mental illness. One of the challenges here during that 140-day odd period, when you're working with the client, they're often in the field somewhere. So it's not like you can go find them in a home because they're homeless, so this has some special challenges, and see the team addressing those. So it's really, really great to see. Here's the schedule. I won't go into a whole lot of detail on this. We did hit the first 2 dates. Here's the 4 modules. We actually, October 11th, it was going to be this morning, but we have extended that by 2 weeks because of other demands on the operation. But generally, the schedule is the first 2 months, you can make your way through the 4 modules involving 2-hour training sessions followed by 2 3-week trial periods. And then you end up with the last month of the 3 months, which is really the fastest you can do this, is this future development planning. And I'll show you what that is in just a second. Module notes and trial notes. So the module notes, before every module, before every session, we ask the frontline managers to reflect on their current way of leading. So these are some of the things that they ask themselves, and then in the session they talk about it. They say, okay, this is how I lead my team. Because the idea is they reflect on the current way, and then they learn, well, here's the lean way, which maybe they're already quite lean, but maybe they're not. And so, you know, this is meant to be like a diary that they keep throughout the whole project. And privately if needed, or if they want to share it, they can share it. But so basically, in the first session, they're reflecting on their current way of leading. Then they learn the lean way and what are their notes. Development objectives say, okay, these are the three things I want to change about the way I lead. And then the development plan is, all right, here's how I'm going to implement those objectives. So that same approach applies to all 4 modules, depending on, you know, leading, and then how do we do working, how do we need to change our way of working, and so forth. Trial notes, this is where some of the organizational development ideas come in. For example, this is the Gemba walk. Did your employee feel at ease? Do you think they were speaking freely? You know, do you think you did more listening than talking? You know, these are things that try to get them to reflect on themselves. This is hard stuff. It's not always easy to do, but it really does have an impact, and they start thinking about, gee, maybe I do more listening than talk. You know, maybe I don't do more listening. Future development planning, having gone through the 4 modules and tried out in the field, you know, what those key tools and techniques, then you kind of say, all right, here's what we're going to do now to make this sustainable. We're going to come up with a schedule for Gemba walks. Am I going to try to do Gemba walks once a week, twice a week, every day? What's the stand-up meeting schedule? This idea of a waste signal chart, but kind of customized. What sort of waste signals do our employees need to look for? What are the core processes we have to standardize, and then create a schedule for that? Going off willy-nilly, this is sort of your plan to keep this going and add to it. Documentation is important, especially on your own, how things are proceeded, as well as showing others. Like in this case, we want to have even a case study report that we can show to other agencies in the COC in Broward, and maybe in other COCs around the country. Mostly pictures, videos. Change in organization trust level is optional because that could be tricky. And otherwise, change in process metrics. So we do, part of solving problems is to establish process metrics and actually look to see some improvement in that during the 3-month period, or if it ends up, you know, going to 4, 5, 6 months.
Linda was talking about Haven for Hope in San Antonio. And she was holding it out as a model of addressing the root cause of homelessness, because I guess they're recognizing that it's not a one-size-fits-all issue. And so they're offering support tailored to each person.
Potential just in responding to homelessness is huge, because I haven't really I've seen a little bit of it, but the idea of applying lean to these kinds of agencies that are involved is pretty new. And the good thing is there is a structure nationally. So I'm sure Haven for Hope, I'm sure they're part of a continuum of care in San Antonio. And so there are national conferences where kind of best practice can be shared. And so from a homelessness standpoint, I think there's a tremendous potential improving and making better use of our scarce budget dollars. The thing is, one Frontline, it's just a matter of what are your processes, who are the people, what are the workspaces. But it's these same techniques, the same project approach.
It's a multi-organization. So you said continuum of care. Her term was a multi-organization model.
Okay.
Healthcare,
Right.
dental, housing, training, probably counseling. She makes the point too that the Rotary Club was talking about homelessness, and during the planning phase, she says that it's not what most people think, that everybody wants to be on the street. Majority of them are families, which is a surprise to me. Wow. Makes me think that maybe my assumptions have gotten in the way of my learning.
And maybe ask the group, those that are in ASQ and not necessarily in homeless, whether this idea of lean development, a frontline operating system, training management, that could improve success. Because obviously, you know, not having the right culture is certainly one of the leading reasons for not getting the success you want to out of a lean initiative.
You know, one of the things I do know about statistics, basically from studies that I've seen, is that 67.2% of all statistics quoted in casual business conversations are made up on the spot. So
okay,
do with that what you will. But I think that the point is not to say is it 62 or 67. How would executing a project like this or implementing lean in general relate to the movement towards work from home? That question, do techniques change? Is it more or less effective? Somebody else to tag onto it is asking about executing projects across geographies and time zones, or even what you're doing down in Florida. It's all geographics. What happens when things, people, resources, requirements are dispersed?
Questions there. Let me address this whole idea of virtual workspaces. Right now, what we're doing is working in a virtual workspace. The way we're organized here allows us to connect with people all over the world, or in the case of like a continuum of care, you can connect from one geography to another. Some of the tools that are in here recognize this idea of the virtual workspace that says, we talk about 5S organizing a physical space. Part of this lean development approach is to organize your virtual space, whether it's an enterprise system, the way you organize right now. We're on a collaboration platform. We're on WebEx. But there are issues there of how do you organize that properly? How do you set up the chats? How do you set up, in this case, it's not too difficult, but those of you that involve Google Drive, shared drives, the infrastructure has really made it that much easier now to connect across geographies and across agencies even within a given geography, and that's part of what I find in 5S organizing your virtual spaces. Just basic file folder naming and numbering. It's a simple thing, but it can be extremely critical for finding the information you want and being able to work effectively. There's also rules for straightening digital items, how they should be zoned out, the same idea of if you're trying to pick something off the shelf, you want frequently used items to be accessible, and the same as accessing files and folders. So anyway, I think with today's technology, we can do that, and this certainly recognizes the other key thing I thought was interesting, this idea of the work from home, and that was part of this other set of questions, which is, how could this lean development be used to address, right? You have the work from home dilemma. Everybody's now struggling with, should we keep working from home? What is the policy? The decisions being made on work from home are really being clouded because there's a lack of trust. Okay, I mean, that's it. If the managers don't trust the employees, like, well, I can't see you here. I don't know what you're doing. The employees don't trust the managers. Are you surveilling my clicks? And work from home can work. I mean, the studies are showing the productivity in many cases even higher than it was but sometimes it's not. So it's not a slam dunk, but the decisions that are being made are not reflecting, they're reflecting a lack of trust. And that's one of the, if I had to say, the most important benefit for an organization for implementing this kind of an operating system is improving that trust, because it's just so important. And that comes from my years of having done this in very positive environments and some pretty negative environments. So
one of the things I wanted to say, I really liked the slides where you were showing about how to apply principles to operations or projects, whether it be physical, like a label, or the digital, like how you're storing files, what your standard naming convention is. And you had a comment in there that was talking about there under accessibility, avoid excessive clicks, essentially.
yeah,
And it's interesting because I did a study on it, and it shows that if you know where you're going, it takes about 2 seconds per click on average. Pretty consistently, if you know where you're going, it's 2 seconds per level. And if you don't know where you're going, then who knows?
right.
You have to resort to search, then it's probably not quick.
Paul Akers' 2-second idea. I mean, that's all these same ideas apply to the way the way you organize your virtual spaces.
Meetings are not more effective online or virtual unless there's an agenda, for instance, in one of those scenarios.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like poorly organized meetings are poorly organized everywhere you are. So they're just more painful when you're online. We are getting to the top of the hour. So I know there were a couple of key questions that weren't asked. Having had David on several times and say he's a guy that you can talk to and you'll get some good value out of it too. So reach out to him. LinkedIn, David Hines, PhD, Fort Lauderdale. Just keep that in mind. Appreciate not only the topic of how to make things better for organizations, but especially the topic of helping others, which is important. So really thank you for that. I feel like it's a double here, right? So you're hitting two topics at once. So appreciate it very much, folks. David, thank you very much again. I will be in touch. Folks, enjoy the rest of your day, evening, or morning, wherever you happen to be. Bye now.